Hello everybody, my name is Christopher Collison, and today we're going to continue with our series of communication and chemistry graduate writing, and we're going to think about perhaps one of the most effective ways to communicate with an audience, and that is through a presentation, or a PowerPoint presentation in this case. And what I'm going to lead you through today is a description of how to present an introduction that sets the theme for the rest of the presentation. It'll be based on the solution that you want to provide to the audience. And then we're going to talk later about how to build a slide organization, what the body of the presentation will look like, and really how we design slides to be effective in that presentation. So watch along, I hope you enjoy, and thanks for listening. So still teaching Chem 670. This is week 7's presentation, and the title now is Clear, Concise and Compelling, not just in our writing but also in our presentation in a live audience setting. But before we move on, as in previous presentations, let's review the work from week 6. So in week 6, I talked about how when we get a hypothesis that's developed with your advisor, we can unpack the key words from that hypothesis, often techniques or materials or concepts. And from those key words, we can build a mind map for each keyword. That means we can build these bubbles, these derivative ideas that come from that original keyword. And we can start to connect those bubbles together. And in thinking about how they connect, we can start to build a key theme, and ultimately we can put together a contents page for our introduction to a thesis. So as we move away from the writing for a while towards how we can present in a persuasive way, let's think about the appropriate presentation structure that moves us in the right direction. And here's an outline of today's presentation. And I'm going to try to put into practice some of the key ideas that I'll be talking about in the rest of the presentation. So first of all, we have an outline here. So I'm going to talk about the importance of a good plan, how to connect with the audience, and even the personal goal that we might have to move the audience. Second, I'll talk about the introduction, and we'll come across these ideas of common ground and disruption of that common ground and the solution. We'll later then talk about the body of the presentation, and I'll provide a default slide organization. And this will ultimately form a deck of slides, and at the end we'll start to think about how we can test for the clarity and coherence throughout that deck of slides. So first of all, let's talk about the need for a good plan. So planning is absolutely essential, and really the presentation is only as effective as the plan that guides its construction. Center first on the pragmatic problems. So as you're thinking about your presentation, think about the key problems, but also, of course, you're going to have a solution. And I put it to you that this solution may be the thing that is front in your mind as you write the presentation. You're going to have some key results that you want to put forward. But remember, those results are solutions to the problems that you're going to set your audience up with. So think to yourself, what is the goal of your project? What conditions and problems have led to that goal? And think about how the audience will connect with these conditions and problems. So let's talk about the introduction as we start to think about planning a really good presentation. So we'll come back now to this idea of common ground, disrupting that common ground and providing the solution. So remember, problems are fantastic when you need to convince someone, when you need to grab someone's attention. So we've mentioned this before, but again, let's recap. How does this work? Well, the most persuasive introduction is one where we provide that common ground. So we describe a belief or an idea that your readers, or in this case, your audience, will accept. Then you want to disrupt that common ground. So you want to describe the problem condition. Second, regarding the problem, provide the costs that the readers will bear if that problem is left unresolved. Then provide the benefits of responding to that problem, ideally with your solution, which you will then go on to describe. So let's think more now about constructing this introduction for your talk. And how would we do this? So let's think first about the common ground that puts the problem into context, and then think about the disruption. And shortly I'll provide an example that will help us through this. So we'll find the disruption and then think about the solution to the problem. As I've mentioned before, usually it's the experiment and the collected data that as a scientist we're going to be putting forward as the solution. What results from that solution? By the way, that's what we'll think about moving forward. What's the upshot of your solution, but also what was the problem that required us to run this particular experiment and get the collected data? Why is the introduction so important? Well, it frames the rest of the talk. So we've also thought about a thematic string, and this is the role of the introduction. So let's break this down a little bit further. And let's use in this particular case an example. And we'll start with the end in mind. So we're going to think about a particular set of data that I wanted to get forward to my audience. I wanted indeed to tell the audience about the fact that I determined in our work a second hump in an absorption spectrum, and it was particularly groundbreaking work to determine where this hump came from. So the solution I wanted to put forward was indeed that this second hump in my spectrum comes from an intermolecular charge transfer species. So this solution would be and will be the body of the presentation I'm going to give to the audience. This is the conclusion that I want to tell the world about. So starting with the end in mind, that's the solution I want to tell the world about. But what's the problem that leads to that particular solution? That solution, by the way, at the moment seems really abstract. So we start to say, well, why would anyone care? We have to provide the context for this particular solution. So I've talked to you about this second hump, and we can recognize that it actually broadens the absorption spectrum. Why would we care about broadening the absorption spectrum? Well, if we can broaden the absorption spectrum, we can absorb more solar radiation. So a broadened absorption spectrum is required in order to absorb more solar radiation. But why do we care about absorbing more sunlight? Well, again, we're in the field at the moment. The broader context is fossil fuels, and the broader context is organic photovoltaics. So the last bullet here basically says the pragmatic problem. So, or it's actually a solution to the pragmatic problem. The pragmatic problem at the moment is we burn a lot of fossil fuels, but the solution here is by absorbing more sunlight. That means more sunlight converts directly into more electricity, and that means we can burn less coal. Bingo! We have our problem. We've gone all the way back to find a pragmatic problem that we can present to the audience, and now we have to flip this on its head. So now we have to, in thinking about the introduction, we have to provide this pragmatic problem to the audience in the first couple of slides. So the point here is, yes, we use too much fossil fuel. That's the problem we want to convey to the audience. We then want to say that solar cells might be the answer, but only when we make them more efficient. In fact, by saying but only when we make them more efficient, we're again disrupting the seemingly broad solution of solar cells. We're disrupting that broad solution with a need to make them more efficient. And therefore, efficiency ends up being the new conceptual problem that we're going to be addressing in the work that follows in the presentation. So this efficiency is associated with the number of photons absorbed. How do we increase the number of photons absorbed? Well, we increase the number of photons absorbed by broadening the absorbance spectrum. So quite technical there, but you can see how the solution I wanted to present was about this double hump, this broadening of the absorbance spectrum, and we had to find a way to connect with the audience through a pragmatic problem. So how else can we connect with the audience? So the other important thing to remember here is that we want to convey new information. We want to perhaps establish that new information as assumed information for the rest of the presentation. So there might be many of you are saying, well, what is a spectrum? Okay. Certainly more of you probably saying, what is intermolecular charge transfer? So we have to address these questions. We have to anticipate these questions to connect with the audience. Again, why? Because we need to present spectra. That's going to be the solution. That's going to be the body of the scientific presentation that I want to put forward. We need to demonstrate what charge transfer is. Again, in my particular example, the knowledge that the broadening came from intermolecular charge transfer was a key solution, a key idea that I wanted to put forward as the conclusion to my presentation. So I need to address these questions in the introduction. What's a spectrum and what is intermolecular charge transfer? So the other role of an introduction is to provide new information that must become established so that the audience can follow through the body of the presentation. So if we just break this down into a scheme here, what we recognize here is that we have our key result or solution, and ultimately the end of the introduction we want the audience to anticipate this key result or solution. It's a solution usually in science to a conceptual problem, and the conceptual problem must be connected to the pragmatic problem, but also there's going to be an important upshot of the solution. It's the why we care about the solution, and of course that's going to tie all the way back to the pragmatic problem that we presented the audience with in the beginning. Another thing the introduction does is we start to put forward new information. We teach the audience something in the introduction so that that information becomes established, and it'll lead to the audience being able to follow along with the main body of your presentation. So remember, a strong introduction is vital. It's a pointer. We remember the importance of a thematic string that connects everything together. It's a framework to connect the remaining slides. And the result of this is going to be, the result of a strong introduction is going to be a coherent, focused, efficient, and more convincing presentation. So, next for you to think about, what is the solution? What is the body of your presentation that you want to put forward? What is that key result going to look like? When you know what that key result is going to look like, then decide what is going to fill your introduction. So, next up, in the break, take 5 minutes, take 10 minutes, state your solution, state the conclusion you want to make in your presentation. Keep going back until you arrive at a key pragmatic problem. What parts of that solution will you need to provide the background for? Your mind maps will be particularly helpful here. So this synergizes really well with your mind map exercises. What will you do with the solution next? Why do we care about the solution? What's the upshot of it? Why will it be particularly beneficial? And when you put all these thoughts together, think of and write your outline slide. You recall that at the beginning of this presentation I had an outline slide, and that can be the plan, that can be the framework for the rest of the presentation. I'll leave you with the outline and a forecast of what's to come in the next video. We'll talk about the body, we'll talk about a default slide organization, but in the meantime, off you go and think about what your introduction will look like and what your outline slide will look like. Thanks for listening.